Here's the best investment strategy of all time for retirement. It's an absurdly simple investment strategy. It's blessed by the top investor in the world. There's data and statistics that back it up, going back 50, 100 years even. And I've been using it myself for the past 25 years. I took the advice I'm about to give you back then, and I've had amazing results, and I'm not changing anything going forward. What is this method? It is simply buying the S&P 500 index. You buy it monthly, putting it into retirement accounts, and you leave it there until you need it in retirement. It's going to compound for 30 or 40 years at least, and you're going to be a multimillionaire by the time you need that money. I know it's hard to believe, but it really is that simple. And I'm going to show you the numbers that make this work. My name is Rich from Rich on Money. I was a stockbroker before I went into the military, had a full military career, retired. I'm a real estate investor, realtor, and property manager. Let's get going on this. Wall Street would love you to not watch this video because I'm going to tell you that you don't need them. You don't need to pay anybody to help you invest your money. You can use this strikingly simple method, invest it yourself, paying no fees to anybody, and outperform everybody you know that is paying for their investment advice. What is the S&P 500 index? People hear it a lot, but not everybody's exactly sure. It is an investment that takes the stocks from the largest 500 companies in the US that are traded on the stock market. It's a collection of all their stocks packaged up and sold to you so that you can invest in them all at the same time. In order to understand why this is the best method, I need to explain first why these two other things that most people end up doing end up making you much worse off. And those two things are, number one, timing the market. Number two, paying someone to invest for you. Let's start with number one, timing the market. What does time the market mean? It's this idea that because of what's going on in the world, because of what's in the newspaper or an election or a pandemic, you've decided that maybe the stock market's going to crash. So you think, well, I'm going to sell right now, get out of my investments, avoid this drop, and then at some point buy back in and I come out ahead. You can also do the opposite. If you think it's going to jump up, you could put a bunch of money in, ride that jump up. That's timing the market. And it doesn't work. To time the market, you have to be right twice. You have to sell early enough before this massive drop happens. And then you have to buy back in before it comes back up far enough for you to not lose money. And unfortunately, in real life, a lot more than half the time, people screw this up and they lose more money than they would have had they not touched anything. That's why setting it and forgetting it with the S&P 500 index is superior. Don't just take my word for it. Let's talk about two recent examples that illustrate this point perfectly. Number one is the first time Trump was elected president. Oh boy, let's get political here. But people have strong opinions about Trump. And when he was elected the first time, and a lot of people thought, oh my God, this is the end of days. A lot of people were pretty sure that the stock market would tank, that he would ruin everything, that his craziness would cause a lot of turmoil in the markets. So in order to time the market, because of this fear, a lot of people sold their investments, like what was in retirement accounts, into cash and then just waited. Let's wait for this drop to happen. I don't want to lose all that money. Except the drop never happened. Like him or hate him, under Trump, the stock market really went up a lot. How much did it go up under him? Looking at a chart over here, 7% on Inauguration Day. 6 months later, 9 more percent. But by the very end, January 20th, 2021, it had gone up 67%. If you were sitting on the sidelines in cash during that time, you screwed yourself. Second example, COVID. Same thing. It just seemed obvious to everybody that as the world was ending, somewhere between February and March of 2020, as things were just going crazy, and we all remember this, stock markets dropped quite a bit. I think it ended up going down about 35%. Well, some people are like, screw this. Maybe even before it dropped that far, they sold into cash because of all that uncertainty and fear. I can't afford to lose my retirement money. They tried to time the market. Oh, is that a bad idea? By the end of summer, that 35% had all come back. And once it came back to previous levels, it came up another 80% up to present day, this being February of 2025. A lot of people I know screwed both of these up by trying to time the market. Other examples of timing the market are things like believing that you can day trade, right? Believing that you can watch Kramer on CNBC and he can tell you when to buy or sell a stock. And this is a great segue into what I want to talk about next. Don't pay anyone to invest your money for you. I said that this was backed by the best investor in the world, and that is none other than Warren Buffett. He's had an absurdly successful career of investing. And his simple advice that he's always given to people is, you're going to beat everybody else by simply putting your money in the S&P 500 index and leaving it there. That's been his advice. Now, he does a lot of complicated stuff for his investors. He buys and sells companies. You'd think that even though he's done better than the S&P 500 index himself, he'd have different advice, but he doesn't. Not only that, you would think that when he dies, the money that gets left over to his wife would be invested in his company, which is doing so well. But that's not what he's decided to do. He's directed that when he dies, the money that will be left to his wife be invested in the S&P 500 index. No joke. Look, if it's good enough for Warren, it's good enough for me. Now I'm going to talk about Warren's bet. Warren made a bet in 2008. He just wanted to illustrate this point. He was just feeling cheeky, I guess. He made $1 million bet that no hedge fund on Wall Street could beat the S&P 500 index over the next 10 years. His part was easy. He just put up the money and let the S&P 500 index do its magic. Some company took him up on this bet and they were off to the races. In 2008, the stock market dropped a lot, and right away Warren was a little behind. But a couple years later, the S&P 500 pulled into the lead, and a few years after that, it wasn't even close. They ended it before the 10-year point because they just knew they had lost. And so here's a chart from year 9. Now, the hedge fund had an average from 5 different investments they made. And so over that 9 years, the hedge fund made 22%. That's not very good. And the S&P 500 made 85.4%. Yes, it blew the money managers away. Now, of course, this is just one limited example. Some hedge fund managers might beat that index on a regular basis, right? Well, there's statistics about this. The statistic for professional investors beating the S&P 500 index over 20-year timeframes is 8%. Only 8% of the time does some hedge fund or some professional money manager beat the S&P 500 index. The hard part is knowing what 8% that's going to be. So I'm going to talk quickly about fees, and I'll do a different video about fees. But there are companies like Edward Jones. You've heard of these companies, kind of like these neighborhood investment firms that your like parents refer you to or friends and family refer you to. Edward Jones, they're going to charge you like these high fees when you buy the S&P 500 index or anything else. They basically charge a commission up front, maybe like 5 or 6%. Dave Ramsey, who everybody loves. Oh, how could I trash Dave Ramsey? Well, I'm going to trash him. Dave Ramsey will send you to his advisors, and they're going to charge you 2% to manage your money and 5.75% to buy any funds and invest them for you. And on top of all that, 92% of the time, it's going to make less money than had you done everything yourself and not paid any fees to anybody. But personally, charging fees like that, I believe are criminal. But that's for a different video. Let's move on. So I want to get a little more specific about where you're going to put this money. I'm telling you that this is the best method of all time for retirement accounts. Why do I make that caveat? Because it is not the best of all time if you invest today and need to make money in 6 months or even next year or even in 5 years. Because over short time frames like that, this method does not always come out ahead. You can lose money in any of those time frames. You could lose quite a bit of money. So you have to have a longer horizon. That's why it's good for retirement. So let's stick to 20-year time frames and higher with this method. It's best to invest as much as you can when you're young, which is very hard to do. But you want to start putting money into IRAs, individual retirement accounts, and 401ks, or whatever your employer is allowing you to put money into. In the military, it's a TSP. Education, it's a 403b. There's a lot of different names for it, but like an employee-sponsored retirement account that might have matching. IRAs have a max contribution amount of $7,000 a year. 401ks and employee-sponsored plans, $23,500 a year. The money in these accounts is tax advantaged. It's a way of cheating on taxes, so take advantage of it. Here's a little trick I want to explain about getting rich from doing this, and that is the money you put in at the beginning, like the age of 18 to 30, is like 10 or 20 times more valuable than the money you put in at the end. Why? Because the money at the beginning gets to compound over decades, and that's where the real magic happens. Money contributed early on could 5-fold, 10-fold, maybe even more. The money you contribute in the last 5 years might even lose money by the time you retire. So the magic is figure out how to contribute a decent amount in your 20s, and it'll make a massive difference in your life. Where to open an account? Well, I talked about fees earlier. Fees can be a problem. A lot of times index funds are bought as mutual funds, and these can be bought at companies like Vanguard, Fidelity, or Charles Schwab. These are, by the way, the 3 top recommendations for me, Vanguard being the top. But any of these are fine. Open up an IRA at one of these companies and find an S&P 500 index and start contributing to it the max you can every year. Here are some more facts on the magic of the S&P 500 index. In the last 60 years, the biggest rise it's ever had in 1 year was in 1995, and that was 37.6%. The biggest drop it's ever had was in 2008, roughly the same amount, 37%. In the last 10 years, it's averaged 11.3% a year. In the last 5 years, it's even been more, 15%. By the way, if you compound 5 years at 15%, that actually doubles your money because of the magic of compound interest. And since 1960, this number is 10.2% on average. If you can invest for 30, 40, 50 years, making 10% compounded tax advantaged, you're going to be damn wealthy. You're talking multimillionaire. Sound too good to be true? Let me know what you think in the comments. It's worked for me. It's going to work for you. If you haven't done this yet, I want you to hit the subscribe. I want you to hit that bell so they notify you when I have a new video come out. This is Rich on Money, signing off.